on to why we all came here tonight, which was to see Bruce. Bruce has traveled today to be here with us from his home in Vancouver. I thought you said North Vancouver.
That's where I was born.
Oh, I misunderstood. Well, that's still a form of travel. It just took him a lot longer from that destination to here today. He didn't travel that far. Anyhow, he's come down from BC to be with us today. To many of you, I know Bruce needs no introduction. He's been a colleague, a friend, a partner, a mentor, an inspiration for many, many years. To many people in this room, but for others of us who aren't as familiar with his work, Bruce led up a really novel grizzly bear study in the Canadian Flathead that lasted near about 40 years. Also worked on grizzly bear research in other parts of the province in BC or in Alberta, helped with some projects here in the US as well. And he's documented a lot of that work in a really great book called Grizzly Bear Science and the Art of a Wilderness Life. If you haven't read it, it's a neat blend of both kind of personal memoir and stories of being out there in the field over the years, as well as a really good distillation of grizzly bear science and how we can better understand and manage grizzly bears here both in the Rockies, but also throughout their range. So it's a really exciting book. I recommend it to you, and it's available for purchase, and Bruce will sign it afterwards if you haven't picked up your copy. Bruce holds a PhD from the University of British Columbia and worked for a long time for both the BC provincial government and Parks Canada doing a lot of this research. And so we're very excited to have him here to share stories. And I just got to have dinner with him and a couple of characters who are in the book, including my dear friend Dan Carney here, who I learned is called Trappin' Dan Carney, for some of his novel trapping techniques. And if those yarns are any indication, we are in for a very good time this evening. So let's go ahead and welcome Bruce McLellan up to share with us his experiences.
Yeah, can you hear this? Is this working?
It doesn't amplify.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Then I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, I crossed the border at about 2:30, stopped at Tim's place in Trigo to visit, and I haven't stopped talking since. So I'm already a little hoarse, but I'll got water. I'll do fine, I hope. I came here, this is the first talk I've ever given on the book. I've talked about grizzlies often, even since I published it, but it hasn't been part of what I've done. But when I was invited to come here, and I knew that, Tim lived in Trigo, and, there's all kinds of people I know. There's probably a dozen people in here that I know well. Of course I came. And the only sad part is that Slyn didn't come. She's staying back in Invermere where our son lives, and she's looking after grandchildren because she is the perfect grandmother. So anyway, this talk is a bit sciencey. I mean, I came to this area knowing that between Kalispell, Missoula, Bozeman, East Glacier stuff, there's more grizzly bear knowledge in this area than anywhere else on Earth. More people know about grizzly bears around here than anywhere. So if I came here and just told you stories and told you that, make sure you put away your garbage and look after your fruit trees and put an electric fence around your chickens, make noise when you hike, carry bear spray, you'd go home saying, oh, that was boring. I mean, what's wrong? I didn't learn anything. So there's stuff in here that is a bit sciencey, and I hope you don't mind. I love it. I'm an academic by heart, so there's a bit of here that's sciencey, and bear with me. And if you don't understand it and you care, ask. If you don't understand it and really don't care, that's fine. Anyway, Flathead study, the first 40 years, and I named it that because I caught my last bear in the Flathead about 4 years ago. I retired 6, 7 years ago. And Garth Mowat is taking it over, so the study is now approaching 50 years. And all we do is monitor females. We have about a dozen females, and we count their cubs every year and count the huckleberry and Shepherdea crops and things like that. It's not nearly as intense as we used to, but it's ongoing. So that's why it's the first 40 years. And maybe someone will be up here again in 40 years. It won't be me, and talking about it. This is Michelle. Oh, starring lots of bears. We have put radios on over 200 different grizzly bears in our little study area up there, and followed them for many years. Some of them not, some of them for many. Some, when I mention their names, guys like Dan and Tim will know them. Rick, stuff like that. Some of them I've followed from many. I've followed from birth until their 20s. One, Aggie, who Rick knows, because I remember Rick getting upset because when Aggie was 4, she was being courted by old Pete, who was like 25. Anyway, Aggie lived to be 32 years old. Her sister, Melanie, lived to be 30. So we followed them on and off for those years. So those are the characters that I talk about when I talk about Grizzly Bear Science. These are the characters I talk about when I talk about living there. This is Rick Mace's arm. This is Michelle and Charlie and myself. This is Dan Carney. It's Michelle. There's Timmy up a tree. Tim Thier. Michelle's about, I don't know, she's probably 12 there. There's Michelle doing her PhD on grizzly bears with Clay Wilson, who's a character I've worked with for 30 years. He's a pilot. He's my pilot, and we've caught.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you speak just a little louder?
Oh, sorry. That's my pilot. We have caught hundreds of bears together, and obviously we've had a few adventures. This is the cabin that we built in 1984, the same year that this picture was taken. That's Celine, my wife, Charlie, and Michelle, and I. So it was kind of a unique thing, I think. I mean, lots of people have studied bears their whole careers. There's probably 10 people in this room that have. But I don't think anyone has studied one population for 40 years. And also, lots of people have studied bears for many years. But I don't think anyone's lived with their family, had kids amongst them. So it was sort of unique. And because of that, plus I'd retired, and I was still too young and energetic to do nothing, I decided I'd write it down. Because over the years, I've noticed that many people in the public are interested in bears, but they're never going to read the science papers. I mean, I've written many journal papers. No one's going to read that stuff. So I thought it was almost my duty to write it down for people, because I mean, they paid for it in one way or another. The taxpayers of both countries paid for this stuff, and so I did. So the first part is Grizzly Science, and what turned me on was a textbook written by a UBC prof, Charlie Krebs, when he defined ecology as the factors and interactions that determine the distribution and abundance of animals. And I thought, okay, so that's what I'm doing. What determines the abundance of grizzly bears? Or why aren't there more grizzly bears? And then the other one is, why do bears do what they do? And that is not describing what they do, but why do they do it? And that is sort of the basis of behavioral ecology. So those are the two kind of questions that I set out when I was 24 years old to answer. The art of wilderness life was birthing, having kids. The kids weren't born in the Flathead, but Celine had I think, an innate ability to know when they were going to come. And so we went to Cranbrook like 2 days before she gave birth. We were back in the Flathead 2 days later for both kids. And so, Then we built a cabin to add it to this trailer so we could fit in it, and we dealt with all kinds of things that I'm sure a lot of people in North Fork remember the fires, the 1988 Red Bench fires, and we had our lots up there, the Wedge Mountain fire, the flood of '95. We lost our cabin that year, and I don't know. Rick Mace found our propane bottle. I remember him saying. So, and still have it. And there's also, there's stuff in here that may not be that interesting to people that live up the North Fork, but the book was also written for people that live in Vancouver and stuff. So there's stories about Slim running into mountain lions and all that kind of good stuff, and also a few weirdos we dealt with. There's as they say, there's a few squirrels in the forest. Anyway, the story of the science will start way back, 1800. Let's just call pre-contact. Although I always like to say that, Alec Mackenzie crossed in 1793, and Lewis and Clark crossed in 2005, or 1805. So around that time, the world was somewhat the way it had been for a long time. And that was the distribution of grizzly bears, and you've probably all seen this many times. And then, of course, the West was settled by Europeans, and they killed most of the bears. By 2000 now, they were reduced a bit in British Columbia. The numbers were way down, and of course, most of the lower 48 they'd been knocked out of. California, where I hear they're going to put them back. I've even been in the Los Angeles Times talking about it. 1924 last bear, 1962 last bear in Mexico. And I remember when the guy killed one in Colorado with an arrow. I had just started working on, a year or two into it. So that's what was going on. And really what laid the great groundwork for all this work was the Craigheads work in Yellowstone that you all know of, because it's Yellowstone and it's the Craigheads, and everybody knows about it because it was earth-shattering kind of research. And they studied the grizzly bears when they were feeding in the dumps, mostly Trout Creek had up to, I don't know how many, 60 bears at a time in the dump and things, and they had by far the best data on grizzly bear populations, because that's the only place anyone studied them back then. Plus, they had great access to them. And then, 1967, we all know what happened that night, don't we? That's when for 100 years, 3 people have been killed in all the national parks in North America. And 2 of the ones that I've read about were just doofuses. Like, one guy got killed because he was chasing a cub up a tree with an umbrella, right? The mother killed him. Another guy had a whole bunch of food on an old wagon, pulled, and a big male tried to get the food, and he fought the male, and it killed him. So, but everything.
Can you go back one slide to that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Somebody under 25, please.
Go back 2 now. 2. Go.
Oh, how many claws does that bear have? Canadian grizzly or
U.S. Glacier Park. They're good checking. Yep. Write the author. Those damn authors, eh? Anyway, and then that night in August, 2 19-year-old girls were killed by grizzly bears in different parts of the park, right? And the scat hit the fan. That was a big deal. The world was shaken. The U.S. parks went to close the dumps immediately, cold turkey. They'd been talking about it before. The Craigheads said, no, you'll be killing all the bears. They'll come into the campgrounds. They'll come into the towns. You can't do that. You got to wean them off slowly. Craigheads wrote the first real population monograph that used computer simulations was in 1974, and they were predicting a good chance that Yellowstone grizzlies would go extinct. There's a National Academy of Science investigation went into it, led by Ian McTower Cowan, another UBC prof, and it was kind of saying, yeah, this could be bad. Anyway, the grizzlies were listed as threatened right then, largely because of all this battle. And then the Yellowstone study started, the interagency grizzly bear study, and Chuck Jonkel's border grizzly bear study started right then, of which many of us here sort of grew up under. So that's why I put all that history in to show that's how we kind of opened the door to us doing work in North Fork. Chuck. Meanwhile, this is something I never show anybody before in my life. Meanwhile, a couple of youngsters met in Banff, ski bums, me and Celine, and we went hitchhiking. We went for an adventure. We hitchhiked all over your country. We hitchhiked down the middle of Mexico, and we hitchhiked back about 2 months. And you know what? It cost $130 each, 2 months. It was cheap back then, and we were cheap, and we still are. Anyway, we got back, and she couldn't, I had to go to UBC in Vancouver. She doesn't do cities, so she went back to Quebec, worked in Banff. And a year or two later, we said, time for another adventure. So we bought a 64 Volkswagen van in Europe for $250 and drove to Nigeria through the middle of the Sahara. You know, air-cooled engines, 1,200 cc's, Sahara Desert, don't go along well. By the time I was finished, I was a bit of a mechanic. You know, I learned a lot. And then she went back to work, and I went to work. And then another adventure came up. I got a job studying elk up in the Rocky Mountains between, just this side of Banff. And she said, I'll come along. So we went up there in the winter of 77, 78 and studied elk. And we were to study what happens to elk when it gets really cold and when the snow gets real deep. And it got to minus 44 inside the trailer that winter. And I don't think it was nearly that cold outside, but it was pretty cold inside. We had a great winter. It snowed like hell. It was a good study. And then she went back to work in Banff, and I went and did a mountain goat study. And then my boss says, Ray DeMarshy, well, you want to go and work on grizzly bears? Chuck Jonkel's got a project down in the North Fork in Flathead, and you go down there. I said, okay. So we drove down to the Flathead to Ninco Cabin on September the 10th, 1978. And in the cabin working was Rick Mace, Dan Carney, and a guy called Kevin Head. And I think you guys were giving him a nickname. I think it was, was it Richard? Richard? Was his name Kevin Richard, or was it something like Richard?
Something like that.
Anyway, that was the first bear we ever caught with Rick. Rick showing us how to catch bears. We caught a pile of black bears, no grizzlies. That's Celine with the first bear we ever caught. Okay, now a bit of science. Population of anything changes because of births plus immigrants, the plus side, minus deaths and emigrations. So what you really need to know how a population is doing is births and emigrations and deaths and emigrations, but on a bigger scale, really it's births and deaths. What makes them born? What makes them die? And if you can figure out all the interactions that do that, you're learning something. Births, my daughter-in-law took that picture, and deaths. That bear's called Glenn. Oh, poor Glenn got shot. Okay, now we're getting to the sciencey part. Most mammals are regulated by food. Food is important. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out food, what's the important ones, what are not. A lot of effort. I think I probably spent more effort on food than any other topic, and probably as much as anyone did. And you do that initially back in the olden days by picking up bear poop and going through it, picking it apart and figuring out what they ate. And luckily I picked up all the bear poop, but I didn't do that. That was done by Rick, oh shoot, I'm slipping, I'm old. Anyway, I'll think of his name, in Missoula. He was a master of it. Scat analysis, Chapman. And you pick up scats, you don't pick up a bias sample, you don't pick them up around the roadsides all the time, you pick them up where the bears were. I went into all the sites and found their turds and picked up, I think, 1,200 of them, and got them analyzed. And then you end up with something like this, right? Which tells me that in the first week of April, they eat largely mammals and roots. And then once things green up, they go for grasses, equisetum, cow parsnips, and then by about July, June, they're starting to eat the corrected cow parsnip. And then August 1st, they switched to fruits, and in the Flathead, it was mostly huckleberries, but also buffalo berries. In the end, they get into a whole bunch of things, but mostly it's mammals and roots again. And that's all good. I mean, it's all fine. I was happy with that. And I had a good feel for it because I picked up all those scats and spent years hiking around following bears to do it. But for some reason, other people, I think, got it goofy. They looked at this, some people did, and they said, well, look at this. Look at the amount of ungulates these things were eating. They looked at the volume of these shapes, and they kind of multiplied it by the nutrients in meat that's really high, obviously, and they said that population's driven by ungulates, by meat. You know, and I go, I don't think so. No one talked to me about it, but this is first week of April. Slynn and I would get out there in our beater skis, you know, the ones that you can go over the gravel with and through the creeks and stuff, and we'd follow bears and follow them and follow them and follow them, and usually no scat, nothing. Once in a while you'd see where they'd found an old dead elk that something had killed, and it was just a bunch of bone, and they'd chew on the hide, and you'd find a scat maybe with some hair. I mean, the reality is there was only males out, and they weren't eating much. And this time of year when they're in cow parsnip, that's growing this high, this big, they can fill their gut in no time. Berry season, they're hitting it hard. They're working day in and day out. So to me, there was absolutely no question that this is when they were eating the volume, but we didn't know from this the volume that they were eating. So that was kind of, it was good, but it didn't tell us half the story. Is too sciencey? I hope not. So here's some of the foods. This is my little guy, Charlie. He's 44 now. I took this picture because it's got Hediocerum. It's a root that they dig. It was growing in this clear cut, and I sure glad I took it because I have a picture of him every 5 years since, and now he's over 40. I got a whole in exactly the same spot, and it just shows the whole forest grow up, and it makes you appreciate how dynamic all these things are. Glacier lilies, another major corm root. Cow parsnip, a big food. Look at that patch. That's a super good patch. Equisetum, another food they eat a lot. I didn't put grass in. I assumed everyone knows what grass is. And the two major fruits, huckleberries and buffalo berry. And then later, like about 1990s, these stable isotopes became usable. The technology happened. And I don't know if I'm going to get into the bio, what it would be, the chemistry of it, but a bit. Nitrogen is the best example because it's the most powerful one to tell us roughly what they're how much meat and how much plants are in their diet. And nitrogen comes in kind of two forms. Nitrogen 14 has 7 nucleuses and 7 neutrons and 7 protons in the nucleus, and they're by far the most abundant. But the odd nitrogen has 8 neutrons. It's a tiny bit heavy, and less than 1% is that. Because it's a tiny bit heavier, it gets retained in the animals longer. The 14 gets peed out more frequently. So by looking at those ratios and the different foods they eat, you can tell more or less what trophic level that they're feeding on, which is great because meat was always the problem. We couldn't tell. There's correction factors for meat, and they're all goofy because the one that eats the bunch of hide isn't the same as the one that eats all the meat. So this was really helpful. And of course, the Flathead came out that the female flathead, bears in the Flathead had about 8% of their meat assimilated into their hair, which is also a bit goofy. And the males had quite a bit more. And then we did a whole bunch in the Elk Valley, just north of there, Garth and I, and the Elk Valley has way more ungulates, like many, many more elk and deer and sheep and goats and stuff. And yet, they're about the same. The males was about the same. Believe it or not, in the world of statistics, 16 is the same as 8. No, there's so much variation that you really can't with any confidence say that the females were different. The males are different than females, but there's really no difference between the two areas. They don't eat a lot of meat in that area. And so what I did for fun, no one's ever seen this before, is I put in the correction factors, the isotopes, and also I weighted each season by the number of scats I found, thinking that would be just an index of how much poop they did. And this is really what it kind of looks like. Animals weren't very big, roots big in the spring, fruit really, really abundant. And of course, fruit is about twice the energy as these guys, as the green stuff. So it's probably no doubt wrong, but it made me happier that at least makes more sense. Never been published. This is just my own goofing around. What makes more sense to me is measuring fat. I got one of these bioimpedance meters that measures body fat and body lean. Serene got it for me in the 1980s. I've been using it for years. And more or less, on average, bears come out of their den with some fat. Some come out really fat, some come out really skinny, but they come out with some fat. They lose it, particularly the males. Breeding season happens, they're not that interested in eating. They lose weight, but the females do too. And then they really gain it in August when they switch to berries. This is stuff that this is some of my favorite stuff. This is on black bears. I inherit tested. I got them given to me, these little collars that had darts on them, and little darts, and you could remote mobilize bears with them. But you couldn't do much of a big bear. You could only do about a 200-pound bear at the most. So I tried them on black bears, and it was good because the bears really didn't know what happened. They're out there walking along, and you just press a button, and poof, next thing you know, they're asleep. And you could do it at any time, and they were free. I got them given to me, and it was great. So I measured these black bears. I could knock them down kind of at the start of the year, and then at the end of the eating green stuff, right, the huckleberry start, and then later, and measure what happened inside their bodies with the fat meter. And what seemed to happen, this is lean is red and yellow is fat. They're losing fat in the spring. They're eating all the green stuff that's quite high in protein. They're putting on lean muscle mass in July. The berries come on. Huckleberries have virtually no digestible protein, virtually zero. They start gaining fat enormously, but they're starting to lose lean because they need protein to keep their body operating. And the same into September, and then that's the winter. They mostly lose fat. So that was pretty neat, I thought. I was excited about that. And it also matched a grad student, Laura, she's got an Italian name, I'll get it wrong, Felicini. She did this stuff in a lab at University of Washington, and it was very controlled with 1-year-old grizzly bears, and they did the same kind of pattern. Even though they're 1 year old and they've got to be growing in structure, and yet when they were eating just low protein fruits, they were not putting on any lean, they were just putting on fat. So it matched just what she was doing in a much more controlled manner. Anyway, grizzly bears, I've weighed them and measured their fat, not on many of them, but during the different seasons. And the females generally eating about 7,000 kcals in the green season when they eat greens, and about 17,000, these are adult female grizzly bears, in the huckleberry season. And for a comparison, a NFL lineman, I've read, I just Googled this, an NFL lineman will be eating about almost 6,000 calories a day. And he's athletic and he's 280 pounds. So, a little bit more than a lineman. But then they're about the same size and they're very athletic. They're working. So, and they're putting on weight too. So it makes sense to me. And males eat quite a bit more, of course. Okay, another thing that I did is I measured huckleberry production by hiking through huckleberry fields every year forever. Like we spent most of August hiking in huckleberry fields. I really think that I probably ate more huckleberries in those years than anyone else on earth. I mean, I ate a lot of huckleberries. And I give them a score, whether it's 1 is no huckleberries, a bust. 5 is one of those bumper years where they're everywhere. Your pants are blue, walking out of the bush. And over the years, the first many years, we had lots of good huckleberry years, piles. And then something happened in about 1997. One of the major huckleberry fields, it's 12 square kilometers of huckleberries, kind of petered out. It's never been good since, that good. And others were declining. So now they've picked up a bit, but they had gone down. Those are the bad years, or the good years and the bad years. The population when I started of female grizzly bears was kind of, about 10. And then it steadily increased during these good years. They were doing great. And then a lot of it, because of the way I measured density, was just in this core area where that a lot of them were concentrated on that one big huckleberry field. It sort of petered out once they started declining after the huckleberry cracked out. So it was indicating once again that these high energy foods were really important to the population, those differences. And then when you look at cubs production, this is cubs per female that was ready to breed. She wasn't with cubs. How many cubs she had the year after a huckleberry year. So after a crappy no huckleberry year, they had between 1 and 1.5 cubs. Lots had zeros. Some had 3, but many had zeros. Lots had 1s. Small litters, and of course after the years of 4s and 5s, they often had 3s. Big litters. And that's been sort of supported with all the lab work, the detailed stuff too. The bigger the bear, the bigger the litters kind of stuff. Lots of variation though. I had quite a few females got triplets way down here with no huckleberries. They were good at other things. They're good mums. They're good wise old bears. Another one which kind of confounded it was density. When the female density was low, there was more berries per bear and they did well, but as the density got up, they didn't have the litter size that they did before, and a lot had zeros. But those both happen kind of simultaneously, but I did sort them out. They're both important, they both happen. But they were kind of confounded. So, back to the meat. This is something that I find interesting too. It's this meat in the diet from the isotope work. I looked at all these populations, and sure enough, the more meat in the diet, the higher the density. Makes sense. Except, all these black ones are fish. Those are the populations that eat salmon. And of course, salmon live across the whole North Pacific. And huge, enormous area, like, who knows how big. And then they concentrate it back to these small streams. And the bear densities get astronomical at these small streams. And I like to think of it as, yes, on the land there's huge densities, but the ecological density might not be that high because really they're getting the nutrients from the whole Pacific Ocean. And if you divided the whole Pacific Ocean by the number of bears, then the density is very low, really. They're kind of cheating. They're absorbing nutrients over a vast area, which is cool if you want to see piles of grizzly bears, and there are piles up there. I've seen, I think, 60-something in one sighting once up in the Alaska Peninsula. Piles of bears eating salmon. If you get rid of the salmon data and just look at the terrestrial meat, it goes the other way. The high-density populations have almost no meat in their diet. And this, I know, has puzzled some people, because I've seen them. I won't point out names, no one here. But it has puzzled some people. Why would that be? We all know that bears like meat better than plants. We don't use cow parsnip to catch bears, we use dead moose, Like, why is this like that? Well, I have to guess, because I don't really know, but my guess is that those darn moose don't want to die. They don't like dying. You got to hunt for them. Where plants, especially plants, some huckleberries like to die. Eat me, I taste good, spread my seeds. The people that I know who don't understand it have never seen habitat like this. This is common in British Columbia and probably common in Glacier Park. Enormous amounts of food in small areas. Huckleberries for miles, up to your belly for miles. When bears are in there eating huckleberries, they're not going to eat any meat. They won't find any. There won't be any there. They're focused on eating huckleberries. Same as the ones that are in those avalanche chutes chowing out. They're not going to find a elk calf in there. So they're, more or less the high densities are in these places with enormous amounts of plant food, where they are horking down on plants. That's what I think, anyway. The other places with ungulates have just, that's like northern, a lot of that's in the north, the boreal, and up in the Arctic. There's very little plant food, and they're eating caribou and stuff and that's all they got, low densities of bears. Okay, here's the real tough part. You guys ready for this? I'm also a caribou biologist, and we predator-prey a lot. And this is type 2 functional response. Buzz hauling, another UBC prof, disk equation. So what happens here is that, my examples are deer, and this is a picture for you, Diane. I'll let Diane tell the story of this wolf. Anyway, I put it in thinking that you guys would know this picture. It's quite a famous photograph. Anyway, at very low prey densities, predators, like the wolves, spend a lot of time searching for prey. They're looking, because there's not much there to find. They're running around and looking, not doing well. But as soon as the numbers of prey density goes up, then they catch some, and then they got to handle it. They got to deal with it. They got to catch it. They got to eat it. They got to digest it. As prey density gets up more, they spend less time searching, more time handling. More time searching, less time searching. They're up here that they hardly have to search. They're just eating. Of course, with a real predator-prey analysis, you've also got a population response. But this is the type functional response for foraging. And why I did it here? Because what I found when I went to within riparian areas in the North Fork, there's huge riparian areas, right? Cow parsnip is a major food. There's lots of cow parsnip. Within riparian areas, I went to, I think, about 200 grizzly bear feeding sites, and I measured the canopy cover of the cow parsnip there. I also did a bunch of random plots throughout the riparian area, and when I compare the used sites to the available sites, when there's no cow parsnip, guess what? They don't eat cow parsnip. When there's a little bit, they still don't eat much. They don't stay there. When you get to about 20% coverage, they start staying there. But at about 35%, that's about as much. They don't want to stay at 60% any more than that, really. They can't eat it any faster. That's more or less, when you think about 35% coverage, that's about as much as a bear feeding can do. So his searching is very little. His handling is big. And it fit the Hollings disk equation. That's 100% canopy or cow parsnip, and they don't select that much more than one that had half that much there. Same thing happened with huckleberries. We did the same thing in the huckleberry fields. And at about 35%, they don't select 60% more. It followed that theoretical curve, which I thought was pretty neat. Okay, now we're going to go from feeding, which we've learned that the energy foods are very important. And it's true whether it's the Flathead or the coast with salmon or white bark pine or whatever. These energy foods are what drives these populations, I think, except for mortality as well. Home range, this cognitive map, they know their range very well. They have a better, I think anyway, I don't know if you guys all agree, they have a better understanding of space than any of us do. They know how to get around. And that's Dan's legs. That's Dan crawling into a cave den. And what always impressed me about their cave dens is that when they go up there at the end of November, there's 3 or 4 feet of snow over that whole mountainside. And it's all drifted in. They've been in the valley, and yet up they go. They go right to that spot, 3 or 4 feet of snow, bury through it, and find the cave. And what really got me one time is I was following a little radio-collared black bear. And you know, up there's a flat lodgepole pine benches, boring, homogeneous, hard to know where you are. I followed her tracks. She had a radio collar on. I followed her tracks about a mile. She came to a big larch tree, about that big around with a broken off top. She climbed up the top and went in, and she was right on the other side of the larch tree. She could walk right to that tree, and so she knew where it was. I mean, it's not like she just found it. And another little story it's kind of neat. I don't know if it really means too much, but it might. Is my buddy Clay and I, the pilot, we're flying along Trachyte Ridge up there, and it's a big, kind of a roundish ridge. It's not cliffy, or it's a beautiful place to dart bears out of a helicopter. It's easy. And we see this bear. He's kind of walking along. He's going south. He was going south, and we see him out there in the open, and just Clay and I, just the two of us. And he goes, "Whoa, there's a bear." And I go, "Yeah, okay, it should be easy." Yeah, no problem. I'll just land over here, and we take the door off and all this stuff. I put on my seat belt and put it on and get my dart going, and we come up and check him out. "How do you think? 1 vial, 2 vials, 3 vials?" "Oh, 2 vial dart." We put it in. Bear's just walking up. He's just jogging along. He's not that rushed, but he's gone about a mile since we first encountered him. So we kind of rip up on him. I'm sitting out of the helicopter. The bear just starts running, looks up at us, poof, he goes into a cave. Clay just poof, zips around. I'm looking in this cave, it's pitch black all the way in. Somehow that bear knew that there was a cave about a mile away up on that hillside, and he also knew that was a good place to be when a helicopter's on your butt. So we never got him. He was gone. And that, what it all means is, the story as much as I do now. Whether it was a fluke, I don't know, but that's what happened. And anyway, nice legs, Dan.
I'll bet you look at his legs.
Okay, dispersal. Home range is kind of boring, but dispersal's not, and it's important. Mama and her babies live in this range. They know a lot about it. It's very beneficial to them to know lots about it. She knows where the berry fields is, she knows where the dens are, she knows where the males are, she knows where her enemies are. She's got a good understanding of what's going on. She's very efficient at it. Her cubs are learning a lot. They should just stay there. They know a lot about it. They're with her for 2 or 3 years. They're learning a lot. However, if they stay there, what's going to happen? Eventually, they'll grow up. And maybe they'll compete with each other, for one, and you might as well compete with someone else than your siblings. The other is there's a chance, even if they know each other, they might not breed each other, but she'll have another litter, and they probably won't know that litter. Eventually, there'll be lots of inbreeding. And in general, mammals disperse, and in theory, a major reason for dispersal is to avoid inbreeding, particularly for animals that don't travel in huge groups. Caribou don't worry about it because there's a million of them, and they're not going to, chances of inbreeding are small. But animals, like especially ground squirrels or territorial animals, they are, not that bears are territorial, they're not, but they avoid inbreeding. So they disperse. And I've been lucky enough to have caught about 28 or something 2-year-old females and followed lots of them till they were adults. And the average dispersal distance from their mother is about 6 miles, and the maximum I ever had was 33 miles, a female that moved to Alberta. Males, much bigger range. The average is 26 miles, and the max is 97. So it almost leaves the females behind, on average. There's lots of variability. So that sort of looks after the inbreeding to a degree. But the behavior is also important. So this is the mother's home range. I actually have data to show it, but I'm too slow on a computer to actually put the plots out, so I just did it quickly. This is the mother's home range. At 2 years old, when the kids leave, they go about that far. 3, 4, there's no rush. They're not breeding yet. They're not old enough. They're not going to get, there's no inbreeding because there's only 4 years old. 5, when the time they get 6, they've moved. It's a slow process. And that's important. It's not instant, like wolves often are. I mean, they'll just get up and go 500 miles, Well, maybe not always, have to ask Diane that, but I mean, they often are instantaneous sort of disperser, where bears not. They kind of slowly bud off. And that's important when it comes to things like fracture zones. And this is the one I'll talk about a bit later, because it's just north of you guys. It's the one, this is Highway 3, Fernie, Sparwood, Elkford, And these are bear numbers. These are all been changed, no doubt. But to have connectivity across that, it means that they just don't walk across it in one shot. They got to live there because they're moving slowly. So the conditions have to be good for not just bears to move through, but to live in. And that's more challenging. There it is. So, Dan, that's our house. This is a fragmentation one, and I had to get a picture of rural settlers, and I just told them, I'll show them where we live. This is our house here. Anyway, that's my grapes and that's my peaches. Anyway, I'm the problem. Actually, I'm not. We own the best connectivity in this area, and we have bears in it, so it's good. So that's the challenge, is the bears have to be able to move through such areas and not get attracted to my grapes, and I have electric fences, and peaches and railways and all the stuff that kills bears. And so that's the challenge and the important thing about dispersal. Okay, now we're going to move to mortality and death. Historically, human-caused mortality, top down is what the people call it these days, wiped out the bears. I mean, we killed them all pretty well across the continent. We as in people. In BC, we had hunting, legal hunting, by a draw until 2017, then it was closed. It was closed for ethical reasons. The hunt was, for all we know, sustainable. It was very low, but it was closed across the province. We have probably over 15,000 bears in British Columbia, so it's not like we're endangered or anything. But it ended. But here's the deaths of the radio-collared bears in the Flathead when they had collars on, functioning. It's not, not where the COs reported them. This is how these bears died. 34 collared bears died. 28 were killed by people. Let's see, can I read my 22 of the 25, those killed by people, were within 170 yards of a road. 11 of the 23 killed by people were killed by bear hunters. So even in the Flathead, where we had the highest hunter-kill density, which is the number of grizzly bears killed by hunters per square mile in the whole province, Flathead was the highest. There still wasn't half of the bears that were being killed by people. And what really surprises managers, and I've had to fight with them my whole career, is that in the Flathead, only 12% of the ones that were killed by people, other than hunters, because they all have to be reported, would have been reported and known. Most of them, they just leave. Flathead's unique, though. You'll see more data on that. Our side of the Flathead. Uh-oh. Also, what's interesting, for the book, I went through all the natural mortalities of grizzly bears. I went through all the mortalities of grizzly bears, but the natural ones, the ones that are not human-caused, across the continent. And I have access to a lot of data that nobody else does for some reason. I have all the Yukon stuff that's never been published, and there's about 3 studies up there, and some of the Alaskan stuff that's never been published. So it was kind of neat to do it. Anyway, across all of North America, these are ones that weren't killed by people. Of the 62 where they knew the death, 41 were killed by another bear, and all of them were adult males that they could tell. I don't know how many, but no one talked about a female killing another adult female. Females kill cubs, and males kill cubs, but not an adult bear. 3 of the 62 starved. 6 of the 62 died of old age. So grizzly bears very, very rarely starve. I thought that was kind of an interesting stat. It's not common. That's one that died of old age. That's Maggie. We called her when she was, we knew her from her birth. She was Elspeth's daughter, one of her litters. These guys all know that. She lived to be 28, and then just walking across the meadow, she just conked out. She ran out of life. Okay, and now I'm going to move away from the book a bit and talk about this fracture, just because it's related to the population near where you live. It's the same population, Highway 3, just north of the border. We have you probably know about Highway 3, here it is. There's Fernie, there's Sparwood, there's the Fernie Ski Hill, the town of Fernie, about 8,000 people, I think. Sparwood's got fewer. Highway, railway, 5 coal mines, lots going on. And there's a possibility that that will, if it's chopped off, will isolate the whole NCDE, which, I don't know, now that you've got thousands of bears, I don't know if it matters that much, but and that's beyond my knowledge. Okay, Clayton Lamb, we caught bears together, but Clayton's the guy behind this, young guy. He collared 76 grizzlies right in the valley bottom, amongst all the people's houses and towns and stuff. I darted some in the mountains for him, but not many. 6 of the 14 deaths were human-bear conflicts. No hunting anymore. 6 of the 14 deaths were road and rail. 50% of the human-caused mortalities were reported there, which is way higher than the Flathead. And I think it's because if you're in the Elk Valley, there's people everywhere, there's COs everywhere, you're going to get caught. Plus, it's easy. You know, you kill a bear, well, he charged me, and you go to the CO, he's an hour away maybe. The Flathead, you don't go to hunt in the Canadian Flathead. You don't go to hunt for the day. Everyone that hunts there pretty well drives in, camps out, stays. You shoot a grizzly bear because it's charged you or something. You don't feel like driving all the way to Fernie to find a CO and wreck your week-long hunt, so they just don't. So I think that's the main reason why there's such a difference in the reporting rate. Yeah. The subadult mortality, like the young bear, teenage age bears, was 40% for males and 30% for females, which is way higher than anywhere else in the continent. The young bears living amongst all those people don't live long. They get into trouble. Once they get to be 5 or 6 years old, those that do seem to do fine. They figured it out. And his survival rate of adult bears is about the same as everywhere. They do quite well. But the young ones, they're dying. The interesting thing to me is the Elk Valley's got a density of 32 bears per 1,000, which is about like Glacier. It might be higher now. I don't. Kate would know. But one of the papers you wrote, you came up with about 30. This is the Elk Valley. This is the density area. It's got Fernie, Sparwood, Elkford, 5 coal mines, people, all that crap going on. And they've still got 30 bears per 1,000. And why I find this encouraging is because I deal with lots of populations that have 1 or 2 bears trickling into the valley bottoms and everybody's getting excited. And now I can say, look at the Elk Valley. They've got a huge density of bears. They've got 20,000 people living in the valley, and people are getting along. We can do it. It's an encouraging sign. I don't tell them that the habitat up there is super. There's huge buckberry fields. I do tell them that. It's great. It's really a good spot. Okay, so that's my main talk, but there's more in the book. And since it's a book talk, lots of it is about this stuff. Raising kids. There's the Flathead River. I mean, we raise a couple of little guys against the river. You know what it's like in June or something. It's rushing down. There's trees coming down, and we got 2 little kids running around. It was pretty nerve-wracking. We caught lots of bears with kids all the time. I mean, they've been catching bears since they were tiny. And I don't know. That's the cabin we first lived in. It was 10 foot by 16 feet. We had our 2 kids in there, lived in there for quite a few years. Then we got a trailer and built it. That's Michelle doing her PhD on them. Anyway, she's 45 now, and she knows more about bears than I do. Anyway, lots of stories. I mean, like all of us who live down there, we got piles of stories. Another chapter is about the history of how to count bears. I mean, most people think counting bears is easy, 1, 2, 3, 4, what's the problem with that? But it goes from the early days when guys like Cliff Martinka and others in Canada would spend a beautiful way to count bears, spend their summer hiking around, looking at bears, saying, there's one, that's a mother with 2 cubs, okay, and she's got, one's got a little ring around its neck, and you try to piece together all the different ones, and you come up with a number. From that era to Sterling Miller, Alaskan, where you can see bears up there. There's not so many trees, where he would radio collar a bunch and then fly later, once they mixed, fly over and count bears and see what proportion were radio collared. He knew how many were radio collared. He knew what proportion was radio collared. He could count the number of bears. To then what Rick and Tim Manley were doing, where you can't see bears, radio collar a bunch of bears, and put up these cameras, not the modern cameras we have today, but these funky old film cameras, and then get photographs of them and see what proportion are marked and not. And we started following Rick and Tim's work when I worked up with Parks Canada for a while, And it was challenging. We had a big area. And then we figured out, Dave Petkow once told me, I asked him if you could get, how would the best way to get DNA out of a cub? Because we were looking at black bears. We get the babies out of the dens. We wondered who the dad was. And you get the DNA. How do you get DNA out of a 2-pound bear? We used to get it out of blood, out of the adults. How do you take blood out of a bear that's this big? I mean, it's weird. So he said, we can get DNA out of a hare now. And I went, oh, really? Oh. And I went and talked to Woods. Next thing you know, we were farting around doing this. And then we got Mike Proctor, his first job in his life, comes up not knowing anything really except how did he talk. And he talked us into a job to test all these ways to get hair. And none of us have looked back, especially him. And it's really been fun working with those guys, Proctor and Petkow and that. And there it is. So that's the chapters on how the evolution of how do we count bears. Here's another chapter, and this is when I lived in Revelstoke, mostly do caribou work. It was a bit of a gong show in Revelstoke. This is the number of grizzly bears managed in the town per year. 121 were managed in a decade. 50 females were removed in a decade. I mean, I remember we grew up there. Our kids were smaller there, teenagers. I remember Halloween. Going out, and there's all these little kids running around with bags of candies and candy apples, all this shit, and there's a big adult male grizzly bear walking down the road between them. I mean, it was bizarre. So about 35 black bears were shot every year. And one day there was a black bear up a tree, and the conservation officer went to shoot it, and Anita Coffin, this well-known woman in town, punched him out. She duped the guy out, and that did it. That was it. They couldn't charge her really because she's so well known. She ended up marrying the city, not the mayor, but the guy who runs the city. And so we made a committee, but it was a powerful committee. No bear aware committee will be like this again. We had the mayor, we had the head of the RCMP. It was chaired by the head of the CO service of British Columbia. I mean, we got a bunch of ringers in there, and we shut it down. It was amazing. Plus it was easy. We didn't have any real agricultural land. Hundreds of feral fruit trees. We had cut down hundreds of trees. They're just wild little apple trees, 30 feet tall, but hundreds of them. Anyway, it was something. But there's a few good stories, and the best one is not mine. I have one in the book about it because the CO, the conservation officers, were in Nakusp, and to get to Revelstoke from Nakusp, you have to take a ferry. And the ferry didn't run until 6 in the morning, and they couldn't get up here till 7. And quite often they'd set a culvert trap to catch a black bear. And then someone would phone in and say, 2 in the morning, "You've got a bear in your trap, I can hear it. Can you tell what it is? It's a grizzly mother's out there. The cub's in the trap." This happened several times. And the best time, I wasn't there. I was in Waterton Park picking up a drop call, flathead caller, and I got a note on my windshield, call this, but Flaw, my caribou buddy, he got called. He went with the RCMP, and he was standing in the window of this house with his dart gun and that kind of stuff, waiting for the mother bear to come by. The mother bear comes by, darts it, and then he goes with the RCMP following it. The bear's conked out in the neighbor's yard. John goes up and he sees the bear's conked up out in this huge marijuana patch. and he's with the RCMP. And he says, "I didn't want to mention it because I thought that process would get too complicated. I'd never get home to go to sleep." So he noticed it, but the cops didn't. And they got the bear out of there and moved it away. And he says, "I walked by the next day and all the marijuana was picked." It was all Anyway, we kind of cleaned up that, and that started the Bear Awareness Society in BC that finally evolved over the years into what we call Wild Safe BC. I even had that. That really kind of changed. It was big. I was a player, but I wasn't the major player. Everybody was. Particularly a woman called Lonnie Parker, who was the regional district elected official. She was really gung ho on getting stuff done, and she could. She was an elected official, so it worked really. Look at the data. Even the black bears, they don't kill too many anymore. There's a bunch of helicopter stuff. As I say, Clay and I have had a lot of adventures. It's what I miss, being retired. But I know I can't do it. I'm 71. I can't do that anymore. I could do 90% of them, 95% of the captures fine, but I don't have the strength and the stamina to do the 5 or 10% that you really got to bust your gut over. But it's a great way to catch animals. We do it where in the coastal mountains of BC, where it's forested, old growth, thick alders. He's an amazing pilot, and it works real well. We can catch lots of bears. And another thing about it that, now that I'm old and retired, I think it could change the way people do research. I keep telling Garth that. I said, why don't you just make your study area all the Kootenay region? Like with GPS collars, in the old days, we had to find a bear every day, right? We had to go out and track them. You couldn't drive everywhere. Now the data all comes to your laptop or your phone. You can sit in a bar and see where Susie is and all that stuff. So you could get in a helicopter with Clay and start wandering around and dart bears here and there and here and there, and it'd be cheaper because you're not seeing this collared bear. Oh, she's got a collar. You could sample a huge area. We did that with caribou. I mean, one time we do a net gun for them. I net gunned and collared caribou over 4 regions. We went from the border to north of Prince George in one day. Wow. Putting on GPS collars. You can do it. Helicopters go 150 miles an hour. You can cover a lot of ground. So that, I think, could change the way people sample. I've sometimes thought, I know you're not allowed to in parks and stuff. There's legal problems down here. But I often thought, boy, that would be the way to sample in like Yellowstone. You could keep collars on. You can go, she's had a collar for 3 years, let's change it. Done. It's easy. One more little bit, something that I've been fooling around with for a long time, is this infanticide question. And this is also, no one's seen it unless they look at the book. I've got male survival, different populations in North America, 12 populations. Adult, just male survival, cub survival. Some people in the world would argue it would be the other way, that if you kill males, young males come in, they're not related to the cubs, they kill the cubs. So if you have low male survival, like high mortality, you'll have, very few cubs. Cubs will be dying a lot. Something like that. Anyway, what it is if you get really high male survival, you get very low cub survival across populations. And the one that really makes a difference is the ratio between adult female to male survival. If you have high female survival and very low male survival, the cubs will really survive well. You got lots of females out there. The males aren't killing cubs at all. They're busy breeding because there's so many females. Anyway, it's something I put in there just for fun, because it's the data. And here's a shot. And we did just before I retired, and I kind of, obviously the thing that jumps out, they're all guys. What's wrong with this thing? And this is the border grizzly crowd that are now 40 years on. And I'll introduce them. Timmy, Rick, myself, Dan, Mike Madel, Chris Servain, Tim Manley. I don't know if Tim and those guys were border grizzlies, but anyway, good enough. But there were females. They were girls, I guess, at that age. But they life goes on, and they did their different routes. But Kate's here. She could have been. She would have been there. She would have been in the picture. But anyway. And Tim, we were talking about books, and we were saying, boy, you know what a fun book would be to write if all of us wrote one chapter. And then Dan started telling us stories about darting 50 grizzly bears when he's up in a tree with a fishing line on the dart to follow the bear. And that's something that Dan and I worked on, in 1981 or something. We had this stuff taped to darts, and we never did get one, but we were trying. Stuff like that would have been fun. Okay, that's all. Yeah, lots of, you can ask questions, but that's all I prepared.
You want to take some questions?
Sure.
All right, we got some time for a few questions. If anyone wants to ask a question here. You want your seat?
In my study area, they only ate moths that I know of on Kintla and Kinnerly Peaks in the park. And we had one collared bear up there a lot. I don't know of any sites in our side of the mountains change a lot right near the border. They get much lower. A lot of people go to the Flathead because they hear about it and they go, that's kind of boring, there's nothing there. And I go, you're looking the wrong way. What's exciting about the Flathead is not the mountains, it's the riparian area. It's amazing. Look into the creek bottoms. It's so productive and so diverse and so beautiful. Look at peaks, they're boring. There's just rocks and army cutworm moths. But we do know of sites further north. There's some sites up in the top of the Bull River that have it. So there are some sites further up, but in our study area, other than in the Glacier Park, I didn't know of any.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Well, I have one just related to that. Really close the boundary for because of the ladybug hatch.
Yeah.
High. Ladybugs hatch way up high and are just coming out of their dens and timing it just right so that
I've never seen ladybugs in our area, but when I was a kid, I was 12. My dad built the tramway at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I was at the top of the mountain, and I turned over a rock, and there was millions of ladybugs under it, and I couldn't believe it. It was this thick. This is 1964, so or 5 or something. So it's a long time ago. So yeah, there are places where there's a phenomenal amount, and of course, the Army cottonmouth moths are a big deal in Yellowstone.
So there's been no study of what they eat mostly of. I know about the moths and the ladybugs, but has there ever been monitored?
Oh yeah. People have done quite a bit of work on it there. I haven't because we don't have them. Yeah, but people in Yellowstone have done lots of work on it. And there's a new master student was looking at it in Canada. We told them where they were in the Bull River and things. So yeah, it's a big food. So in some places, but not so much where I worked. In none of the study areas I've worked at, I've ever seen that.
You talk about how many grizzly bears are doing so well in lower elevations of the Elk Valley, but they can't disperse across it.
They are dispersing yet.
Okay.
No, they are.
So
It's not a fracture yet. No. And they're doing a lot to keep it going. They're going to do what they did in Banff, and that is to fence it and put overpasses. Clayton's done great work. He's got one of those ungulate composting things. There was a big issue. There's lots of elk there. There's lots of roadkills. There was problems because they were dumping the roadkills right by the train tracks. Bears were getting killed. It was a mess, but he's getting them all composted now. So things are really quite improving, but the numbers of people are going crazy in that valley. It's a beautiful valley. It's got a great ski hill. So it's going to have long-term challenges ongoing. But right now, no, they do cross. It's not too bad.
Yeah, Bruce, I read your book last year, really enjoyed it, so great piece of work, and I encourage everyone to buy it. you guys practice something a little different in Canada with these bear managers who here you did talk about it briefly about your darting from a helicopter.
Yeah.
And in the book you wrote a little bit more about it, so you dart a bear, you hope you get it with the dart where it's supposed to be, and you land the helicopter, and you walk into those thick stands of cow parsnip, 100% covered. What's the odds and chances that that dart is taking effect by the time you look at it?
He's still alive.
Boy, there's a lot of stories. Right off the bat, I can think of 3 or 4 times where the bear's out, we're in the helicopter, we stay up until it's not moving, and it's laying down and looks out, and we get out, and I carry a rifle, and I get out by myself because pilot's got to go land somewhere, and so I walk up, I can't find the bear, it's gone. And 3 or 4 times the bear is gone, we never found it, and I saw it conked out. And a couple of times, one time, though there's lots of stories, first, it's a very safe way for the bear. I haven't killed a bear in decades with that, hundreds of them safe. It's really good. And this is rugged country. I mean, this is nasty like stuff. But there's a lot of adventures. But that's happened 3 or 4 times where the bear is gone. We haven't found it. Sometimes they can just wake up, and it gets you going. But that's when we were trying these mixes with the vet. Helen Schwancy came along, our vet, and we were doing these mixes. Vets like mixing stuff and do all these complicated things. And we darted this one bear. It wasn't a very big bear, but it was up in Wellsgrave Park, big plateaus, miles. You could see for miles. It was beautiful. And Clay, the pilot, so I'm getting something ready. The bear's out. It's over there. Everything's fine. He walks over casually, leans right over it like this. The bear turns around and leaps up with his mouth wide open, right like that, and snaps his jaws tight right there. And Clay jumped a mile, and he says, "We're not doing any more mixing." And so we've all survived. No, there's some excitement. I mean, the ones that really I worry about are the ones where I got lots of stories. You dart them, and they get into the forest. And there, Clay's, well, call me when you find them. And I'm out there tracking and I've always found them, that you track them and you track them a long way sometime, and there they are conked out always. But that's nerve-wracking because you're listening all the time. And we've had some. I guess we're in the bear story, though. Another one that I get a kick out of always is I collared a bunch of bears for a grad student, a PhD student who wanted to look. He's mostly a caribou, wolf, moose guy, but for some reason he wanted to collar a bunch of bears to see if they were, also in the area where the caribou calve and all that stuff. So I went out to collar bears with him, and when there's 2 of us plus Clay, he gets out because Clay likes his machine really maneuverable. And I know we did 3 bears that night. And it was tiring. The last one was a mother bear way up in the mountains. These are big mountains, Selkirks. They're 12,000 feet, and the valley's at 2,000, so they're big mountains. And she's way up in this basin. It's spring, it's May. Water is pouring off the mountains. It's gray, chocolate milk tumbling down. The bear's mother with 2 yearlings sitting in this beautiful little basin. She's easy. Go up, dart her. She just sits there. She sits there easy. We're way back, way off. You're not doing anything. Just as she goes out, she walks into the waterfall. So there it is. Clay zips in, I bail out, she's tumbling, I'm right there, she's trying to bite me, I'm dodging. Finally, I got to make this decision. When she loses it enough that she's not going to bite me, but I'm going to get her, that's when I grab. And I grab, and she's still moving, and we're rolling, and we're fighting, and finally Clay, he's landed, he comes over, we drag the bear out, we get it out, then he takes off and gets Rob. And I'm staying at Rob's house with his family. So that night we get back, and we get in and we walk in, and I hear Rob walk in and his wife Sylvia, and Sylvia says, "So Rob, how did it go?" He says, "Oh, it was so great. It was just so easy." So
let's go ahead and ask one more question, and then we'll wrap up here. Folks can stay and ask, of course, more afterwards. But anyone else got a burning question that they want to ask?
No, somebody else?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Is the bear population, in that part of the world? I know down here they say we're slowly growing.
Yep.
And it's mostly because we've learned to manage humans.
Yep.
The human-bear interaction.
Yep.
We're not killing as many.
Right.
What's north of the border?
Same. Most populations. We have some that are not. We have a couple that are on the coast mountains that aren't doing that well. They're fairly isolated. One is the one that our house fractures. We own the best linkage part, and lucky we do, because a lot of people that aren't very bear friendly. The population to the south is isolated. There's only about 20 bears there. It's not a lot of inbreeding, not doing well. Of course, the North Cascades, there's no bears left, by Manning Park and your Baker and all that area. So there's some areas in southern BC a few that are struggling. We've monitored them in many now. We had some populations doubling in 10 years in the coast. We've had many going up at 3 or 4%. The Elk Valley, when I started there in the 70s, I can remember being in the Hilltop coffee shop when somebody came in and said, "Hey, there's a grizzly bear in Lowen's Field." it was a big deal. There was a grizzly bear in the valley bottom. Now they're common. So it's both countries are doing fairly well, I think. And yeah, there's lots of challenges, but grizzly bears are a pretty resilient animal. They're very smart. They're as long as you don't kill too many. And the other thing is they don't, the ones that living in the valley where there's people don't hurt anybody. They don't seem to really do anything. I mean, no one's been mauled in the Elk Valley except for hunters sneaking around quietly or people hiking quietly. I mean, it's always surprises. It's very rare. I mean, the stuff that Kerry Gunther did in Yellowstone, where he looked at where the attacks are, there's no attacks in the front country in Yellowstone, pretty well, one I think it was. It's always backcountry hikers and surprising bears. Just don't surprise them and, make noise, don't surprise them. So I think people are learning that. It's challenging for me now because I'm working in other places where they're just getting their first bears, and a lot of people are frightened. And they don't like me saying that, you don't worry, they're not going to hurt you, probably. Some do, but so it's, it's really getting a lot better. I mean, I'm sure, I remember once Rick telling me that, remember those places we used to trap and catch 1 million black bears? He says, there's no black bears anymore, it's all grizzlies, stuff like that. It's changed a lot in the 40 years that we've been doing it.
If you want to stick around and talk with Bruce, he'll be back here. You can sign his book. Our next talk in this series will be featuring Diane Boyd. It will be in East Glacier on the 3rd of July. So if you want to hear more North Fork stories, but this time focused on wolves and the adventures that Diane had, please come join us at the Community Center in East Glacier on July 3rd. July 2nd. July 2nd. Bruce, check out our info booth. And I also just want to make a plug real quick for something that you could do this week to help grizzly bears. Bruce writes about this in his book, that one of the key things for recovering and maintaining grizzly bear populations is access to what we call in the U.S. public lands or crown lands in the Canadian Flathead. And we all know that there's a budget reconciliation process going through Congress, and we learned today